Nini everyone, Mary here again. I have found my webcam, but you might notice, or now you notice, that I'm using a microphone because the sound on the webcam microphone is absolutely atrocious, so just trying to adapt. Anyway, I wanted to talk about something that I previously addressed in one of my videos. I think it was racism and Tumblr sucks. And this is sort of a 2-year journey that I've taken. And it's led me to a particular discovery, or epiphany, throughout these 2 years. I found out about the whole social justice movement
via paganism, and something that I've learned from then since on is that social justice has started to infest the pagan religions and movement that we've had. I previously mentioned on that one video that these particular forum users that I frequented, they were Tumblr users, and they introduced me to the idea that, oh, racism isn't prejudice, or just prejudice, it's prejudice plus power, institutional power. And I was like, that's bullshit, that's nothing that I've ever heard. And then I went down the rabbit hole of discovering what the social justice movement is, and how hypocritical it is, really. I don't have a particularly favorable view of it. What is social justice? Well, it's a very wide set of beliefs that are particularly on the left side of the political spectrum, as opposed to, say, conservatism. Most of these people are very highly liberal. They're on the very far left of the political spectrum. They're very often authoritarian, so if you've ever seen that political compass, they're on the top rather than the bottom, which is libertarian. They have left ideology, and they also are highly authoritarian in the sense that they want to use government and other sorts of institutional systems to implement their ideology, their leftist ideology. And, if you are like, wait, what are you talking about? Hit me up in the comments. I'll explain it a little bit further, especially if you're not from the United States, because what we consider left-leaning political ideology is probably a lot different than some other areas of the world. But another thing I really want to stress is that they have a collectivist set of approaches to certain societal problems, especially considering things like racism, sexism, LGBT issues, that sort of thing. They often like to lump people together based on certain characteristics that they can't control, such as race or sex or their sexual orientation, different things like that. And then kind of classify people as either oppressed or privileged. It's kind of like communism applies socially, if you're, any way familiar with communism. They like to change or classify people as either part of the oppressed group, or the proletariat, the working class, and the bourgeoisie, which is the ruling rich class. Whereas in this respect, it's the same kind of approach, but it's only applied socially. So people who have been historically disadvantaged or oppressed, like African Americans within the United States, they're the oppressed class, whereas the white people, or the bourgeoisie, and it can be applied in other areas, like people who they call it cisgendered.
and it applies to people who are born, and identify with the sex or gender that they were born as. So me, I would be considered a cisgendered woman because I was born a girl, I still identify as a girl, and I'm comfortable being a girl. And it can go further down the bend, like men are the bourgeoisie in terms of sexism, because men have always been part of, the ruling class, patriarchy, that have been keeping women down for centuries. And they want to change the political and economic and social systems to make things more just, but in all reality it's just going to be more unfair, because they're saying, or a lot of them want to say, like, especially like in feminist circles, well, there's a wage gap between what women earn and what men earn, and therefore we have to put a tax on men in order to give that money back to women, and then they'll be equal. Well, if women are really equal, then just give us the same opportunities as men and we'll do just as fine. We don't need a special tax or anything. We don't need special incentives or privileges or anything like that in order to gain the same footing socially, economically, politically, whatever, as men. And this is something that they've tried to apply within any kind of social group, be it by race, sex, gender, or however you identify as, certain traits that are perfectly arbitrary, that you can't pick, that you're just born with, and it's nothing that anybody can control. And this has been something that's been seeping into pagan circles that I've noticed, and other people have noticed. I'll include some links in the description. But one thing that I was thinking of is why? Why are so many people kowtowing to this political ideology within pagan circles? Because you can't go anywhere, especially on the internet, and not run into people who, are fourth wave feminists, and they say, oh, well, if you believe in equality between the sexes, then you have to be a feminist, or else you're an anti-feminist and you're garbage. It gets really tiresome. But one thing that I've noticed is that people within pagan circles often have liberal or left-leaning values. People shouldn't have to be controlled by the government via abortion laws, or gay people should be free to love who they love, and all sorts of things like that. Socially, nobody should be controlled by the government, which is often liberal, or at least classical liberal values. A lot of people in pagan circles also believe in transformative justice. They want to bring the system down in order to create something anew. You can see it with Starhawk, I think her name is. Oh, it's been ages since I've read any of her books, but she's one of those activist pagans who want to change everything politically, and I can't necessarily fault her for that, but I think there are a set of problems when you try to use your spirituality or religion in order to affect things in the political spheres. It's also been a long time a harbor for feminism, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. I understand, a lot of people still consider themselves feminists. I used to too, but until, I started seeing what modern day feminism is doing, I didn't feel like I could identify that with that movement anymore. But for the longest time, paganism, was a safe harbor for feminists and people who sympathize with feminism, because in so many pagan circles, we're trying to bring back the divine feminine and women empowerment.
because, you know, in ancient pagan circles, women had power, women had control, and there were women or female deities that were adhered and adored for millennia. And, you know, bringing that back also too recognizes the fact that women have value too, which for the longest time, you know, people didn't believe in because, you know, the Abrahamic religions having just the singular male deity, and, you know, these older societies deciding that, well, men have, you know, their sphere in the wider world, whereas, you know, women have their sphere in the home. But, you know, you see this in paganism. It's something it's a place where social justice issues are tolerated, and it's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just when this stuff is taken too far that it really becomes a problem. Because a lot of pagans, you know, they don't always agree with the political left or leftist ideologies. I have a lot of conservative friends. They're, you know, those, you know, America, fuck yeah, kind of people, who believe that, you know, they should have the right to own guns, rights to free speech, a free market system. They don't like socialism. They you know, don't like political leftist ideologies. And, you know, that's perfectly fine because I live in the United States, and people are entitled to whatever political beliefs that, you know, they want. And I've always been somebody who's leaned towards the left. I mean, even now, if I were to take that political compass test, which is really popular, I'd probably still lean towards the left, but these days I feel like I have been left behind by the far left, and I feel more centrist now than ever before, really. And I have friends who have always been on the political far right, and they feel like they're outcasts in a lot of pagan circles. But it also kind of makes conflict within groups. One thing that you'll find a lot on Tumblr is this idea of a call-out culture. Like, if anybody does anything remotely against the political ideology that's set forth by a lot of people who are on Tumblr, they'll call you out, and it's like, you're sexist, you're racist, you're a misogynist, or you're a transmisogynist, or you're a transphobe, or you're this, or you're that, you know, insert buzzword here. And they immediately demand that you apologize. It feels like a witch hunt, which is kind of ironic if you think about it, because we're witches, huh? But if you know anything about, like, the 1950s and McCarthyism, you know, he was routing out and naming out all these names about people. It's like, oh, this person's a communist, this person's a communist, this person's a communist. And people had their, you know, careers and everything ruined. And they could have even gone to jail because they were under suspicion of being a communist. And likewise, in Tumblr pagan circles, especially, but it can happen in real-life circles too, you see the same behavior. It's like you say something that's just a little bit out of line, and then you're accused of being something really horrible, not a communist in this case, but like being racist or being a misogynist or something like that. And you're put in the limelight, on the spot, and, you know, people are demanding that you either apologize or you leave the circle. And I think it's just an extremely toxic kind of mindset, because, and I'll include a link to this one guy. I think he's brilliant. His name's Prince of Queens. He calls it starving piranha syndrome. And that's when, you know, these SJW types, the social justice warrior types, you know, they're using this McCarthyist witch hunt to chase after these people that are accused of wrongthing when they step out of line of the leftist political social justice ideology. And when they get rid of all those people, then they find the people who are still in line, but they're just a little bit out for whatever reason. They might be white, they might be a man, you know, that sort of thing. And then they accuse them of the same thing. of being a racist, sexist, misogynist, whatever. Because once they don't have any more enemies, they'll just find new ones. And I just thought that was just so amazingly brilliant. He actually gave this whole thing a name. I mean, it's not necessarily McCarthyism, because it's not communism that they're after. It's people who are like, well, I don't think white people are actually racist all the time, or men, have certain rights too and certain problems within this world. And another thing you might have, already seen in some of my previous videos, especially that when I was talking to Dakota on that one particular video, social justice issues within paganism also causes a segregationist environment, especially through the idea of cultural appropriation, because when you say that somebody can't actually practice a religion or study a religion because they're white, and this particular religion is one that's been primarily practiced by some group of people that has been oppressed in some fashion during history, it creates this wall that separates different groups of people from one another and their ideas. Like in the idea of voodoo, and a white person wanting to, study it and maybe get initiated into the tradition. If they're condemned as somebody who's culturally appropriating something, then you have this class of people, white people, who are disallowed or forbidden from learning about or practicing this particular religion, voodoo. And it just separates, this group of white people who are only allowed to practice, say, Celtic religion or Asatru or Greek or Roman religions, and then you separate all these people out from the people who are technically allowed to practice Ifa, Igbo, Yoruba religion, or if they're interested in Far Eastern religions like Shinto or Chinese traditional religions. When you disallow a group of people, or any group of people, because, I've seen people, actually be consistent with this, because usually it's only the white people who are not allowed to look outside of Europe. They're like, well, if you're Asian, well, then why the hell are you looking at African religions or South Asian religions if you're African or Muslim, or, if you're African and you're trying to look into Muslim, then you're culturally appropriating too. They're being consistent, but it's still just as bad, because, now you have these groups of people who are only allowed to look at the things that their ancestors did, and it doesn't allow ideas to disseminate from one culture or one ethnic group to another. And it creates these walls where nobody understands each other, and it can devolve into something really ugly. But another thing I really want to emphasize here is that social justice ideology, the far left, all that stuff, it destroys relationships. And I'm going to get into something really personal here. You see, I belong to a real-life pagan group, and I've talked about this before. But there was a particular person who I knew, or who I know, who believes wholeheartedly in these social justice far-left ideologies and considers herself a feminist. And after learning about all these sorts of things on, the internet about social justice stuff, I started speaking out against it in all all different areas of platforms and stuff like that. And sometimes she would post things on her Facebook feed that I didn't agree with, stuff about feminism and stuff like that. And I would comment on her page and say, hey, I don't agree with this. I think that this is better explained by A, B, C, and D, or I don't agree with this for X, Y, Z, and different things like that. And she would constantly, misunderstand the things that I was saying. She didn't want to, engage with it in sort of a rational debate, which is what I had hoped for. There were a few times where I said, hey, well, I don't think I'm a feminist. Or this was a one example that I remember. And I think this was the second time it happened. Where she was talking about feminism, and I was like, well, I don't see myself as a feminist because of what the movement is currently doing in the modern day. I mean, I think I previously described myself as an old school feminist, and I could still say that. I believe in legal rights and economic rights for women. But in terms of what's going on in these days, I don't agree with it whatsoever. I don't need a tax for men just so I can get some more money because, you know, I might not earn as much as some men do. I went into a STEM field, so I earn a good deal of money right now. I actually earn more than my fiance. But to say that, you know, women need more money because they choose jobs that don't pay as much, I don't think it's a fair solution to tax men or take money away from men in order to close that gap. I think that it's better solved by giving women the ability to choose whichever job that they want to take. And if it pays more, then fine. And if it doesn't pay more, then that's fine too. But, I birdwalked. But, yeah, I don't see myself in the same way of a feminist that my friend did. And she started spouting some nonsense off on her Facebook feed. She didn't name any names, but I knew it was me she was talking about because she was complaining about anti-feminists. I never described myself as an anti-feminist, and I don't now, but I knew she was talking about me, and she called me an anti-feminist, and I got tired of all the labels that she was placing on me, so I unfriended her. But it doesn't end there. It was Mabon of this year. I went to a celebration at a friend's house. This is a third friend, and she's that priestess friend of mine. I think I've mentioned her before, but during this particular celebration, Mabon celebration, my friend, who's the feminist friend, her daughter was having a coming of age ceremony, and we were all wishing her well, and I didn't bring anything because I don't know her daughter very well. But I thought I'd give her some advice, so I kind of paraphrased something from the instructions of Ptahhotep, and part of that was, you know, not worrying what other people think about you, and only addressing, you know, only, oh gosh, what's the word I would want to say for that? Only paying attention to the problems that are within your own household. So, you know, it's like the way I would say it is like something that my grandpa would have said, not my circus, not my monkeys, because he was Polish. But anyway, I didn't know about it at the time, but she took a great offense as to what I said to her daughter, because she thought it was something from addressing the political field of things. And she's like, well, I'm going to teach my daughter to be a social justice warrior. And I had no idea that this had happened. My sister was still friends with her on Facebook. And if she hadn't been, then none of us would have known about it. But my sister got into a big, huge fight with her on Facebook. And after she told me about what she had said about me, she called me a closed-minded bigot. That pretty much dissolved our friendship altogether. I mean, I was still civil towards her and stuff. You know, even before this, I mean, I knew that I shouldn't say anything particularly politicized to her. But after my sister texted me, it's like, hey, what did you mean when you were talking at Bainbon? I'm like, what did I say now? You know? Or what did she misinterpret now? That is like, I'm not... If anything comes up again like that where I can say anything, I'm just not going to say anything. It's like, I have nothing to say. You're not my friend anymore. Fuck it. But that is another way that social justice ruins things within paganism, especially friendships. But one thing I really do want to say to everybody here, paganism can inspire you to do things within the political sphere, but don't get mixed up in politics and get it mixed up with paganism as well. It's never a good thing to mix religion with politics. That's why we have the First Amendment within the United States here. Our government can't establish a religion, and they can't tell us how to practice. Likewise, you shouldn't use religion to tell other people what to believe politically, because it only causes a lot of strife, a lot of hurt feelings, and just a lot of fighting. I mean, you're not going to probably see it within physical violence, but it could happen. And it's just going to be something stupendously ugly and unnecessary, because we can all agree about, certain types of ethics and morality, but applying that to political ideology is wrong. So I hope you kind of take this into consideration. It might blow up in my face, but at this point I don't really care. But just some food for thought. Thanks, and Synapti.